Welcome to zoology. My goodness, I sure wish that we were together and in person. In any case, let's hope that things get better and that as the semester progresses, that perhaps all of the effects, the good effects of vaccination and boosters and people wearing masks properly at all times in the dorm and all the other places where you move about and live your life, that those things will contribute to a safer environment and that we can be together soon. But that's not happening as we start, and I want to get going here with zoology. I'm Ed Zalisco. You've already received some communications from me, and you guys are off to a great start. Thank you very much. I've sent out to you a Google form on the 7th of January. That probably is this last Friday. Why do I collect this information? Well, there are some questions that let me know if you have any particular needs or something that I should know about you. Also, so that I can better address the course to the students that are in the class this semester, which is you. And some contact information. Every now and then, for example, somebody might leave something important in the lab. Could be your iPhone, it could be your book, something like that, or like a purse or wallet, keys, and we know who it is, and I want to get information to you quickly. So if I have your phone number, I could text you or call you and assure you that we have safely whatever it is you might be missing. So that's why we ask those questions. Now on to the class. Well, for starters, what is the name of the class? So often, if you listen to people, they say zoology. It's zoology. Okay? Zoology would be spelled right over here, Z-O-O, and then ology. Instead, the title of the class is zoology. And zo is a word root that means animals, and ology is the study of those animals. Okay? So it's not zoology. Zoology here would probably be the study of zoos. I imagine that that's a thing somewhere, but that's not what we're going to do. Now, right now, as we get going, what I'd like you to do, and I really want you to write this down, so just jot it down, the first type of animal that comes to mind, just the name of an animal, not your pet's name, but a type of an animal. And I want you to jot it down just so you can commit to it. I don't want you to say later on, oh yeah, I was thinking something else. So actually jot it down. Get a little pen or paper or something right now and just jot down quickly. Well, usually when we're together, I collect up those responses and I take a look at the type of animals that each of you suggested, what first came to mind. There is, by the way, no right answer. But what comes to mind is interesting and has to do with this zoology class that we're starting together. So what do people think of first? Do they think of whales? Or something like an alligator? Maybe an insect? This is my dog Zoe. Zoe, get it? Zoe. That's actually her name. Zoe, because we like the name, and because I teach zoology, Zoe got her name, and Zoe might come visit us sometime in person, if everybody's okay with that, in the zoology lab, okay? Or maybe you thought of a beautiful bird like this. Well, what did people think of? I don't know. I haven't collected your responses, and it's now too late to do that. But I can tell you, I've been here about 33 years. I've taught the class sometimes twice in a few years. And so this is more than 35 years or 35 times of teaching zoology. And in the past, what do people routinely suggest? The answer is about 95% of the time. So not all, but really close to all, people suggest mammals. And mammals would be anything that has a hair that you know about. Mammals are actually defined in the fossil record, in fossils, by having only a single pair of jaw bones. So if you feel your jaw right now, on the left side and right side are separate bones that fuse in the middle, but that's one pair of bones, the dentary bone, your jawbone. Mammals also have hair. Mammals also typically have mammary glands. We'll talk more about mammals later on in the semester. But in any case, we are mammals. Okay, and so big surprise, lots of people have mammals for pets, cats and dogs, for example, and so that's not a big surprise. Sometimes birds and other reptiles come up, maybe 1 to 2%. Maybe 1 to 2% suggest an amphibian, mostly because people might know that I study amphibians, and so maybe they're just trying to think of something associated with me, maybe. Sometimes fish, and rarely anything beyond that. So let's give some thought to what it is that these critters right here are. They collectively hold together. It's not just that it's mostly mammals, it's mostly things. So can you think of a trait that is in common, a trait that is in common with fish, amphibians, birds, reptiles? Birds are reptiles, by the way. So birds and other reptiles and mammals. Can you think of any trait that unites them? And before we go on and do that, I just want to make a little note. And that note is that what I'm talking about right now could be and likely will be on an upcoming lecture exam. That would be the next lecture exam. So this would be a good time to start taking notes. As we get started, I like to be very clear about what we're doing and what's expected of you. And so here you'd need to be taking notes over some of what we're talking about. Okay. In the real world, about 96% of all animal species are invertebrates. Okay? Invertebrates are things like insects. 4% of all species, now, by the way, always make sure that you're really clear. We are not talking about individual animals. What we're talking about are species. So humans are just one, right? One species. Most, by far, 96% of all known species are invertebrates. 4% have vertebrae, and that's us. And that is the trait that is in common that I just asked about with fish, amphibians, reptiles, including birds, and mammals. So, what I had said before, what most people think about are mammals, and if they suggest something else, it's probably another type of vertebrate animal. Those are vertebrates. We'll learn later on that there's a subphylum that is called the vertebrata. That's what we belong to. Okay. So, this is what we tend to think of most often as typical animals. Something with a backbone. Something like this lizard here that's got a vertebral column. Now, sometimes we say a backbone, but that's not really a proper, best way to describe this series of many bones running down the length following the skull. So the skull, and then there's a single, they are not paired. There is not a left and a right. There's a single set of bones running right down the middle called the vertebral column. The vertebral column. Sometimes people call it a spine. That's probably better than a backbone because a backbone is singular. Sounds like this is all one fused thing. And here you can clearly see one of the advantages of not having a single bone. Here, by having many bones, we can have flexibility. See, many bones give us flexibility. And so this lizard here can have a bending tail and can flex its back. One of the reasons that lizards and salamanders flex their back side to side is to actually move the back leg forward. So here you can see the back leg, the back left leg of this lizard is reaching forward right over here. So that flexible vertebral column is made of a series of bones, not a backbone. And yet that's the way sometimes it's phrased. So why is it that we think of mammals and why we think of animals that have a vertebral column like us? So think about, why do you think that is? and if we're in person, and boy, I hope we are soon, keep saying that, I will regularly stop in class and you'll work with a few people around you. Lecture is not just me talking. And I'll ask questions, and you and others around you can speculate on some of the answers and bounce ideas off each other. And then we'll come back together and talk about it. So, as you think about it, why do we tend to think of vertebrates? Why do we tend to think of mammals when some animal comes to mind? Well, because that's our pets, because that's who we are, because that's the big stuff we tend to see. Even though, if you go outside on a summer day, you're likely to encounter many more species of invertebrates, like an insect here. Now, I'm about to show you two big charts. And before you look at it, first of all, it's very small, so you might have to get close or even magnify it. Maybe even pause this video and zoom in. What I need you to know is the numbers of species that I'm about to show you in each of these charts is not updated. In fact, it's not an easy task to find out what are the total number, for example, of stink bug species that we know, or how many different types of mole species or monkey species are there. In any case, what I want you to know is the proportions, though. Look at these charts and notice the proportions. So right here, this is, probably 20 years old. It's a chart of all living organisms. Now, this doesn't just mean plants and animals. We got viruses in here, and over here some bacteria, fungi, algae, and how we classify these forms of life has changed just as well. But notice this. If this is a whole pie of all life, look at the tiny portion here. I don't know, maybe it's a sixth or so of this pie is animals. And many of you just finished having botany with Dr. Bray. Now, the fact that they form only about a sixth of the life doesn't mean they're unimportant. As most of you know, we need plants to stay alive as a source of oxygen and food and materials that we make clothing and homes with, etc. But notice over here that there are at least, let me be clear, there are at least 3 times as many insect species as there are all plants together. Let that sink in. There are more insect species than all types of plants. And insects themselves are just one type of animal. Beyond that, as we'll look at, insects belong to a larger group called arthropods. And we will have, if you looked at the syllabus, different labs that we'll go to and look at different kinds of animal phyla. By the way, if you hear snoring or anything, another one of my dogs is just beneath me right now. It's Lucy. I'm kind of rocking her to get her to quit snoring. She was snoring here. So she wants you to know that she's somewhere on this chart too, over here in the other animals. So from here all the way to here, which is about 3/4 of all species known of life, is zoology. We rule! Zoology rocks! Just plants right here versus insects. That's what we were talking about. Again, the absolute numbers, they're varying. Here, now looking at just within zoology, where do we see this kind of diversity? And some of these names over here are groups, phyla, that we will look at. So look, sponges right over here is the first group that we will look at this coming Tuesday. After that, we'll look at cnidarians, which are jellies and sea anemones. After that, we'll look at flatworms right here. Over here, we'll look at segmented worms like an earthworm over here. We'll look at mollusks. We'll look at echinoderms. So mollusks are clams and snails. Also, octopus and squid. Echinoderms are sea urchins, sea stars, lots of other things right here. So these are all independent labs that we will have, including one for us, which we are chordates. And so that will include over here mammals and other things. So right over here, 3/4 of this chart, more than 3/4, all the way over here, are all arthropods. Those are animals that are like beetles, um, that have a hard outer shell, an exoskeleton. They usually have uh, jointed legs. That's the arthropod. So one of the things we're going to do in this class is learn about the word roots that make up the terminology. And if you know word roots, you can make really good guesses at terms that you don't know already. So arthro, what's the word root arthro mean? And one of my hints for you as you're learning word roots is to think, what other word do I know with arthro? And sometimes it helps for you to think about medicine and disease. So do you know of a disease of joints that you might suffer from as you're getting older? It sometimes happens to younger people too. Arthritis. So arthro means joint, and pod, P-O-D. So think if you can find a word that means pod. So what kind of doctor is a podiatrist? And a podiatrist studies feet. So arthropod means jointed feet or jointed legs, and that's what is uniting the arthropods here. An exoskeleton and jointed legs. Okay. Well, as we look within the arthropods, holy cow, look at this. There's one particular type of insect, that dominates the arthropods. In fact, almost a third, it's actually a little bit bigger than this pie wedge now, almost a third of all animals are beetles. And a ladybug's a beetle, and you might have ladybugs that have come into somewhere where you're living. In the wintertime, they look for a warm place, and sometimes they're in a corner by our garage inside the house, and I just let them stay there because they're looking for a warm place. Ladybugs are eating aphids. They are helpful for those of us that keep plants. Some of you might even know that sometimes people buy a big bunch of ladybugs and release them into their gardens. There's some problems with introducing species to places they aren't naturally found. But if those are naturally found there, then that might not be such a bad thing as a form of biological control. Okay, so I'm going to recap here. Animals form about 3/4 of all known species of life. Now, I have to be fair. What are species of viruses? They're strains, so this term doesn't really apply to them. Bacteria as well reproduce asexually, and so they aren't sexually reproducing. And so sometimes we talk about strains of bacteria as well. So the idea of a species isn't so clear here for viruses and bacteria. Within fungi, you can see it's relatively small, and that's fair. There are different species of fungi. Algae get variously lumped in with other things, protozoa just as well. So it's probably fair to say that about 3/4 of all species known that aren't bacteria and viruses, about 3/4 of the species of known species of life are animals. Okay? And of those animals, about 1/3 are beetles, and because beetles are insects, about 70% of animals are insects. Okay. So first of all, we know somewhere about 1.3 to 1.4 million animal species. But that's what's been described. And it seems probably pretty amazing to you, maybe was amazing to me, that biologists, zoologists, have not been able to comb the earth and identify all the species that are there. In fact, we might be somewhere between 1 out of every 5 actual species to 1 out of every 10 have been described. That means that maybe 80 to 90% of species that are actually in existence have not been described. And if you pick certain kinds of arthropods, by the way, and travel to exotic places, and you really learn the rules for identifying a new species, you actually, if you wanted to in your life, and again, there's a lot of training, go on and get a graduate degree, maybe a doctorate in zoology, and you can go out and discover undescribed species. And then it's a very difficult task to then describe properly those new species. Okay, so we know of about 1.3 to 1.4 million species of animals. There may be anywhere from 5 to 30 million actual species. And now some of the numbers to make sure you write down. About 85% of all animal species are arthropods, and that's arthropods here. That includes crustaceans, like this crayfish, spiders, here a centipede. This is a trilobite, so it's an extinct group, and butterflies. About 70% of all known animal species are insects. So to go back, 85% of all animals are arthropods. Insects are types of arthropods, so insects are a subset. 70% of all animal species are insects. And here's some beautiful insects, some diversity. And about 30% of all animal species are a type of insect that we were just talking about called beetles. And one thing that beetles all have in common is that the outer pair of wings right here, called, you don't have to know this, but called elytra, these wings right here are hard. So one characteristic of beetles is that their outer pair of wings are this hard kind of shell. And here you see it on ladybugs, and here you see it on other kinds of beetles. So I've been driving at something, I've been making a point so far since we've started. And that point is this. I want to expand your idea of an animal. And by the way, I paid extra for that. Notice I want to expand your idea of an animal, and I'm making it, see, expand, see. This is an old guy that's having fun with technology right here. But let's not miss the point. We mostly think of mammals when we think of an animal. That's what comes to mind. You think of an animal. And yet you just learned that 85% of all animals are arthropods. 70% of all animals are insects. So if on this first day, when you thought of an animal, if most people just think of a good example of an animal, you would think of an insect. And you'd think of a beetle if you thought of an insect, because beetles by far are the most common type of insect. So I like teaching a class in which we do a lot of stuff, but everything is focused on the field of zoology and focused on expanding your idea of what it is to be an animal. Well, what is it that all animals have? That's actually a tough question. Okay. Do they all have a mouth? No, there are animals that don't have a mouth. And so hopefully you recognize this if you're interested at all in veterinary sciences, or if you have a dog or a cat. This is a parasite. This is a tapeworm that lives inside of mammals and other critters, also found in other vertebrates. This, not the head end, but the attachment end of the body is way over here. And then these repeated units right here are actually reproductive units that grow larger and larger, and then they fall off and they release eggs and they spread this parasite to other animals. Well, this animal does not have a mouth. It's sitting inside of an animal's intestines, a mammal's intestines, a cat or a dog's intestines, or our intestines, and it absorbs the nutrients in your digestive tract through the surface of its body. So it doesn't eat or drink. It simply absorbs through the surface of its body. So we're expanding your idea of an animal. And when you think of an animal, could you say that all animals have mouths? No. And you probably can think of other exceptions. And they're what we call the early or primitive animals. So see if you can think of another example right now. And I can't read your minds, and I could pretend to, and I could go, oh, yeah, that's right, yeah, a sea anemone. Well, sea anemone has a mouth. So what else doesn't have a mouth? A sponge. So somebody might have suggested a sea anemone. I go, nope. But sponges don't have mouths. How about heads? So a mouth is usually associated with a head. We're going to learn about animals that have a mouth separate from the head. Okay, hold on. A mouth separate from the head? You betcha. But you got to hang on for that one. I'm not going to give everything away on the first day. There are animals without heads. Now here's two animals. One has a head. That one does not. And of course, that's me in the Florida Keys. And I'm going to show you some other pictures. But you can just drive down to the Florida Keys and bring your favorite zoologist with you, because there are things that will seriously hurt you in shallow water. But if you go in with somebody that knows what they're doing, you can find some amazing things like this beautiful, gorgeous sea star. Okay. Here's something else without a head. So this is a sea anemone. That's its mouth. So they have mouths, but not a head. I want to show you some more photos. I love to take students out on field trips. Oh my goodness, this COVID thing has driven me nuts. I love to take students to scientific meetings with me. I love to take them to really cool places like the Florida Everglades and the Keys. I've made many trips doing so. And I am so very sorry that hasn't been something that you've been able to do. That is, those of you who have been in my classes in the past, you guys are fairly new. So we haven't been able to go to a lot of places. I hope things clear up, and I hope that perhaps Dr. Call, maybe somebody you want to bug, could be talked into taking a small group to the Florida Keys. And who knows, when I'm retired, I may join you on one of those trips and help lead you. So if you play your cards right and talk Dr. Call into it, or Dr. Bray possibly, or the person who's replacing me, maybe they'd like to take a few students to the Florida Keys, and I'd be happy to go with you. So that as a little teaser for you. Let me show you some pictures. So this is right next to the highway. If you've ever been to the Florida Keys, this is within 100 feet of the highway. And you go at low tide. And when you go at low tide, then animals that are normally in maybe 3 feet of water, maybe only in 1 foot of water, and you can find all kinds of things. Oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe what you can find. So there's the road right there. Here's some of my students scrambling about only 7 years ago. We wear the proper foot gear. They're wading in the water, so they might have swimsuits on, but they all got protective shoes. You might just wear an old pair of tennis shoes. Some are wearing little Playtex gloves like you wash dishes with. You can buy this at Walmart for a couple bucks. That's also a good idea if you really don't know your stuff, because then you can reach down and pick something up and not be too worried if it's poisonous or if it might nibble on you or maybe even hurt you a little bit. So here they are. There you can see the highway right nearby, and they're wading out, and you can see dark areas where there's rocks with probably algae or something growing on them that's probably a plant. And they're looking to see what they can see, and you know, when you look down through the water, you can't see real clearly. So sometimes people snorkel, and we can get our faces down really close, at least, to see what's going on. It's quite an experience, especially in this kind of shallow water. And in this particular case, had these strong students, and there was a fairly big rock. And so I call them over, and that's one of the joys of being a professor, because I get to stand on this side, and they lift the rock up. That's the way properly to lift a rock. Or if you're now out in the woods, guys, right here in our own backyard, If you're lifting up a log or lifting up a rock, you lift it up like this so that you open it away from your feet. And I hope you know why, because if you lifted it the other way and there's something under it like a snake, it could bite you. But if you lift the rock up like this away, so I'm talking about these students on this side who've done the lifting, they've lifted this properly. So if there's something under here that's going to cause trouble, they're protected by what they lifted up. That's what I'm telling you. Well, when we lifted up this rock, holy cow, there was an octopus. And the octopus wasn't moving. It was alive, but it wasn't moving. So these are sea urchins right over here. And then I saw this. Maybe you know the story. They lifted the rock. I looked, there's an octopus. It's a big one. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And then I saw this and I went, oh, that's why the octopus is not moving. Because those are eggs. And there was an octopus guarding her nest. So here's the octopus, one of them. Fairly big, by the way. So the body mass here is about the size of a softball, but of course flattened and distorted as octopi will do. Here's one in a little Ziploc bag. This is one of the things we like to do, is bring Ziploc bags. Ziploc bags are really useful out here in the woods, out in Illinois, or here in the ocean, because you get a critter and you can put it in the bag with water so you can allow the animal to keep moist, and we can see it really clearly, and the animal's not sticking to me and causing all sorts of problems, okay? And then, of course, after about 5 minutes, we let it go. So don't keep it very long in the bag, but it allows you to look at things. By the way, the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. Wonder when the last time was the Cardinals won the World Series. So I guess that'd be the Cubs would be most recently the champions. And yeah, I know. That's coming up on 6 years ago, 5 seasons ago. In any case, that's what these octopus look like. Here's other things that we find. This is a sea slug. This is actually like a snail on land. But here they're in the ocean, and guys, these are really big. Take a look. That's someone holding one in their hands. Isn't that huge? This is the tentacles here on the head end of this body. They have these beautiful little circles right here. And maybe you know, if you disturb an octopus a lot, they'll release something in defense. So see if you know what that is. And if you're watching this with somebody else, then you can show off. An octopus releases a big cloud of ink, a very dark, it's not toxic, but it clouds up the whole area and it's kind of dark purple. Well, this is why you take zoology. Is this sea slug related at all to an octopus? Yes, they're both mollusks. Yeah. In fact, you can eat snails at restaurants called escargot, and you can eat octopus and squid called calamari, and they're both chewy. And that's a characteristic of mussels, of mollusks. They have this chewy kind of texture. So we were once handling one of these when I was out there in the Florida Keys, and it released. You don't want to disturb them, guys. Please don't if you find one. But we were gently handling it, and apparently it was too much. And it released a great big cloud of ink. And people, my students, did not have on the gloves. So our hands got stained purple. And I told them it was the neatest purple ink stain, or the neatest ink stain they'll ever get from a giant sea slug. They're great big. Also, there's conchs out here. They were abundant, at least back here about 7 years ago. Those conchs that Zach here is holding, each of them are about 50 years old. These are live conchs. So these are, of course, mollusks as well. And there's the living conch inside of its shell. So he picked them up and we put them back. We don't keep them very long. Oh my goodness, so many things that you can find in the shallow water. This, some of you might recognize, looks like a sea star or a starfish, you might say, but we tend not to use the term starfish, okay, and jellyfish anymore because guess what? They aren't fish, okay. So this we call sea starfish, we call sea stars, and this is not a starfish. This is a brittle star. And brittle stars move their arms like this to crawl across the surfaces. They don't like light, so you'll have to lift up a rock to find them underneath. And I said they're brittle stars because their parts break off. And so here's a regenerating arm of this brittle star here, and a regenerating arm over here. Now that takes a lot of energy for the animal to replace its arm. It's not a small thing at all. And the animal may just die of some kind of infection or something. So please be gentle when you're handling animals, and even if they can regenerate a tail or something else, please do not damage it, because that animal may spend the next couple years just regrowing that part. And just to add on to this, I was interested for my PhD on this real impact of regeneration. And I noticed that when I was studying salamanders, in a few cases, there were salamanders that were regenerating tails or arms and legs. And those animals had to miss the reproductive season for at least 1 year. They had to skip reproducing because they were spending all their energy making an arm or a leg or a tail instead of making eggs or sperm. So that's a huge cost for an animal to lose a reproductive season. Let you look at this. These are abundant in the Florida Keys. See if any of you know at all what this is. That'd be great. Later on, maybe you can tell me if you knew what this was. It's a member of the echinoderms, so it's related to sea stars, and it's related to brittle stars and sea urchins. That's weird. It's called a sea cucumber. Holothuroidean is the group, but these are sea cucumbers. In a lot of Asian cultures, it's a common food. They eat sea cucumbers like this. They cut them up. I don't know that you and I would probably want to do that unless you really are into trying things. Look how big this one is. This one's over 12 inches long. Great big. And that's the case. They're very, very common. I have to tell you a quick story. So I was lucky to join a group of teachers 11 years ago and go to China. So I got to go to Beijing, and I got to tour deep inside China, and then I went back to Shanghai. When we went to colleges and elementary schools and secondary schools, it was just spectacular. And while I was at a fancy restaurant in Shanghai, as an appetizer, they had cucumbers, it said. And I thought, okay, here I am in China, and I'm not big on killing anything and just trying to eat it. But these are kind of abundant, and it's a normal Asian food. So I thought, okay, I'll try the cucumber. And I was kind of squirming in my seat, talking to the other teachers, and really trying to build up my nerve to try a sea cucumber. And so I'm kind of nervous. And about 15 minutes later, they brought me my appetizer, and they set the plate down in front of me, and I laughed so hard because it was a cucumber. It was a pickle. It wasn't a sea cucumber that actually was a pickle. So I never have gotten to try them, and I was a little relieved. Okay. Here's another one. Another sea cucumber. This is now, as you can guess, hermit crabs that are inside. These are people who've recently graduated from Blackburn. Someone else, and there's a great big hermit crab where if you're really, really still, the hermit crab will kind of come out. Hermit crabs, as they grow larger, have to leave the shell and go into a bigger shell. So they're shell apartment hunting in these shallow waters, and there's some competition for a really good shell. So there I am, just showing you a sense of scale and showing off my shirt, which I'm really proud of, from the largest scientific organization in the world called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. and I'm happy to be an advocate for science. Um, this was my birthday, and so I've just had another birthday, and I could not imagine a better way to have spent my birthday than with this group of wonderful students. And this is in Key West, Florida now that evening after we'd spent all day in the Florida Keys looking around. So it's a great memory. Why were we in Florida? Well, we were in Florida because the largest zoology association in the world, called oddly this name, Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology. It changed its name about 20 years ago. It used to be the American Society of Zoologists. That seemed like a really good name. And instead, this is kind of a more popular phrasing to think about biology. And integrative means that you're going to take things that you learn in all kinds of areas and put it together to understand something. I think we all do that. Comparative means that when you're studying one animal, you wonder how it compares to other animals. I think we all do that too. So it's kind of a silly name for me because it's a society of doing stuff that we all normally do in biology. Anyway, we were in Florida, and at that meeting, at the end of the meeting, I told him that we'd take a couple days field trip in the Florida Keys. While I've been down there before, we also go to the Everglades, and if you haven't been to the Everglades, it's a great opportunity to see alligators running around, all sorts of birds. It's a real special habitat. And sadly, the Everglades is only about anywhere from 0 to about 3 feet or 1 meter high off of the ocean. And there's water slowly flowing through, fresh water flowing down through the Everglades into the ocean. Well, guys, as ocean levels are rising and humans are causing the climate to change, then ocean water is coming in where there was fresh water. And that's creating problems. And the Everglades in your lifetime may mostly go away. Yep, I'm going to let that sink in. In your lifetime, most of the Everglades may be turned into a saltwater marsh. They are freshwater right now. Sometimes when you're down in Florida, some people like to go to Orlando. Oh my goodness, you got all the Disney stuff going on down there. You got Universal Studios and other things that you might want to see, SeaWorld. And those are places where people are making money. And so there are going to be signs everywhere and advertising everywhere. A little hint for you. If you're interested in zoology, or you're interested in seeing the world and seeing wild things, you need to know that there are not a lot of signs advertising what's really the most exciting part of the world. And those are parks, national parks, state parks, international recognized places in the world. And you have to work at it. You have to do a little bit of research for an area and find out what else is neat. Well, one year, maybe about 10 years ago, I was there in Florida with another group, and I had my birthday, and I was with another professor, and he said to me, hey, listen, while they're out doing other Universal Studios or Disney stuff, what would you like to do? And I said, I've never seen manatees. And only an hour drive away from Orlando is Blue Springs State Park. And in the wintertime, manatees go up rivers, and sometimes they're rivers fed by springs. And those rivers, those small spring creeks, are warmer than the more open water. And so the manatees go into these areas and are concentrated in the winter. So concentrated that you have to wait in line in your car to maybe have a chance to even get into the park. And lucky us, we were able to get in. And here's what we saw. Right there, 20 feet away from you, you don't touch, you don't throw things with them, but you can watch them, are manatees. And this was a series of manatees that were just having fun. They were rolling over each other. And there was a local zoologist there, and I asked him, so obviously they're just having fun, but do we, as zoologists, think that there's anything about this? Now, you should know that sometimes when mammals, for example, young mammals play, they might be acting out hunting, or they might be acting out aggression, where each of them is kind of fighting each other. Those are things that animals will do sometimes. So I wondered, what is the adaptive advantage of this? Why has this evolved? And they said, no, we just don't know. It may just be social, that they're just having fun. So it's fun to watch animals have fun. All right, so you can see some really weird animals in our world, and you can see them in the Florida Keys, including sea cucumbers and brittle stars and octopus that are sitting in maybe on their nest. So something really, really exciting like that. Okay, I want to finish up here today in our introductory lecture by telling you that about a few other types of animals and the kinds of things that I want you to keep in mind when you think of what it means to be an animal. That is the nature of this class. And I want the first day not to be talking about the syllabus. Notice that I just, for the first time, brought it up. I instead want to get you excited about what this semester is about. Some animals live in places you might, as it says, never expect. And sometimes it's places that don't get sunlight. I'm going to say that again. Places that do not get sunlight. Places that if the sun went out today would probably be able to last maybe a number of years, maybe 5 years. And that's places deep in the ocean where magma, the hot stuff, molten rock, has come up near the surface and is heating the ocean. Deep in the ocean, heating the ocean. Temperatures as high as 50 degrees C. Now, your body temperature is 37 C, so these are much higher than that. You wouldn't make it at 50 C. And at 50 C, what we find in these places are tube worms. These are related, believe it or not, to earthworms. These are like earthworms. We'll also find lots and lots of mussels or clams, and then various arthropods like crabs and shrimp, and sometimes a few fish, but not a lot. Here they're noticing an octopus. But mostly here you're seeing tubes that are made by these worms, and this is the head end of the worm. It's really a filtering device, so they're filtering the water. So this is one of those rare ecosystems that is not based on the sun. Not based on the sun. Okay? So most of what's going on in life on Earth requires ultimately at the base of the food web is photosynthesis, plants using photosynthesis. This is not the case here. Here it's energy from sulfur's reaction, the element sulfur reacting with, I think, oxygen. And somehow that's able to be converted into something that keeps these animals going, or things that the animals prey on keeps alive. Now, at the other extreme, we went from 50 C now to below 0 C. Well, you should remember that water freezes typically at 0, but then you should remember that there are conditions you have to know for water freezing at 0. That's water, pure water, without any salt in it. And you might, because it's just been really cold, might know that sometimes we put salt on our roads. Why do we put salt on our roads? And the answer is because it lowers the freezing point of water. So, what's the freezing point of ocean water? And the answer is it's below 0. And that means then that there could be liquid water, like in the Arctic, that's below 0. But there's fish that are swimming in that water, and they're not frozen. And those fish have fresh water in them. But they also have salts within their tissues. Just like if you look at your fingers right now, look at your fingers. Your fingers have a lot of water in them. They also have other salts in there too. So the freezing point of your fingers is not 0. It would be below 0. Okay? Well, these particular Arctic fish have something else. They have a molecule, and I got this from a scientific paper describing a special kind of antifreeze molecule that's preventing water from crystallizing inside their bodies. So these animals have an adaptation, a version of a molecule probably that you have, but this version that was favored by natural selection, by evolution, allows these fish then to not have ice crystals forming when they're at a very, very cold temperature. Okay. More stuff. So we just looked at temperature extremes. Really warm hydrothermal vent, Arctic, really cold. How about this? Stuff that's living on your body that you don't probably know about. There are these little mites. These are a type of an arthropod that live in hair follicles. And you have hair, and you have hair follicles. These mites are a normal part of our skin. So I've seen numbers ranging higher than 98%. So we can count on just about everybody in our class having these mites all over your face. Right now, on your face. Can you feel them moving? Can you feel them? No. No. Why? Here you can see where the mites are located, and sometimes about these follicles. They don't seem to cause any problems in people. Although this mite has been incriminated with things such as, so some people says it causes acne and blackheads. It doesn't in most people. In fact, it's found throughout the world without any ill effects. This I got from the Texas Agricultural Extension Service. So most people don't have a problem. I believe a version of this mite causes hair loss in dogs. Yeah, so sometimes it does cause problems. So guys, I'm wrapping it up. What are we going to do here in zoology? We're going to expand your idea of what it is to be an animal, how animals are different, and why they are different. And we're going to see that size makes a big difference in how animals function. Also, where they live. Why are they different? Well, they live in different places, right? So this is an animal, a flatworm that lives in the ocean. This is in water. Here it's crawling over or scooting over a coral. And over here is a great big praying mantis. And then we're going to consider how they've changed, how they've evolved, how one form is like another, and that they're related. You know that all people on Earth were really different. That's wonderful in my mind. Biology loves diversity. Okay? So nobody has to convince biologists that diversity is important. Diversity is required for life to survive. We have to have options. We have to have different ways of doing things. In any case, here, this kind of diversity that we see here is the food stuff that evolution works on. And of all the different kinds of people on Earth, when we look at the ancestry, we find out that we are variously interrelated. So chances are, actually they're almost certain, that everyone in zoology shares some common ancestor. Okay? We just have to wonder about how far back we have to go to find that grandparent that we all share. And that's a good thing to end on. All life has this common origin. You share an ancestor. You share an ancestor with this praying mantis. You share an ancestor with this flatworm. That's fun, huh? So, that's where we're going to end. This is the end of the first recorded lecture. I'm going to have at least one or two more here that you'll want to watch for, and that will include the introduction to the phylum Porifera, the sponges. So you'll want to watch for that, and you certainly want to watch that intro before you would go to any of the lab activities for that phylum Porifera. All right, signing off.